So let me start with all of the disclaimers and warnings. I'm coming from the voice over IP angle, and I think the submission was accepted primarily from the interest in showing how an application is actually concerned about privacy. And so therefore, I will start with a little bit of background about SIP. Then I will start to what we have been making ourselves busy with, which is troubleshooting and analytics, especially with some SIP-specific attacks. And I will also show our way how we have been dealing with it very specifically. For SIP, I think one of the things which is distinguishing this application is we have some 150 years of backwards compatibility. And those who started to look at the SIP protocol, which emerged in about 1999 when RFC 2553 was published, it really does bear some backwards compatibility features which are not making the life difficult. With respect to privacy, just to be a little bit more specific, to give some examples, anonymization has been actually there for almost decades. It depends also a little bit on the country you're living in. But for example, in some countries, there have been for decades specific requirements like you must never disclose CDRs, call detail records, if someone is calling a domestic violence hotline, just in the case that the offender may find your billing record and may wonder what is this call about. So it has been existing there. It has not been really very welcome by operators because it means an additional burden for them to anonymize things, hide them. But they have been doing that under the regulatory pressure. Now with SIP, things were a little bit reinvented, but in the end, like most revolutions, they ended up where they began. So we have both the new regulations and the old regulations. From the troubleshooting perspective and monitoring perspective, I would like to add a comment on one thing I heard. There was kind of like minimalistic Marie Kondo approach here. I'm not signing up to that because whenever we have been analyzing things, we found that Murphy's Law prevailed, and always the bit which would have helped us to find out what it was about, that was not there. I wish it would have been. So we actually try. We are the collector type of engineers, and we are not minimalistic at all. At the same time, we have this, some of the privacy requirements which are enforced by legislation. The security aspect of it is becoming important when about like in 2010, voice over IP began to emerge and serve millions of customers worldwide. There were some very naive attacks, mostly like stealing administrator password for a PBX and then making phone calls to a 900 premium numbers owned by the attacker. So that's how they were making money. But it has developed over time. We have registered the first DOS attacks reported by Qaeda in 2011 with like million of bots. And in this decade, we have witnessed massive attacks costing millions of dollars on companies like bandwidth.com and VoIP MS. So for monitoring, how do we get to recognize an attack? This is how, if you're an administrator, how your console looks like if you walk home in the evening. And it looks, I like to explain that to my kids because they see a camel silhouette there. So in the upper part of the picture, you see kind of two hills, and that signifies that people who make business phone calls, they wake up in the morning, quite more or less same time. In the midday, they've got a lunch coma, and they resume their activities slowly, and then they fade out over time. And that's the way. What helps us to see this is collection of massive data, of massive amounts. We almost collect more data than we see in signaling. And we structure it typically in some JSON documents. There are some older systems which do other things, but if you want to have a filtered, aggregated viewpoint, you will end up with some kind of structured logs. I have printed an example of such, like we collect, they identify who has called whom, and a lot of other data, duration of a call, QoS statistics like packet loss, variance of it, and so on and so forth. From the privacy point of view, there are very roughly 3 classes of, and the exact classification also depends on the country in which you are. But there are data which very explicitly identify personal identifiable information who you are. It's telephone numbers, SIP URIs, IP addresses. It's almost always one-to-one to your identity. It's not as good as DNA sample, but it's good enough. And that's definitely a problem. And then you've got a lot of data which could be actually used very easily for identifying a person. Say, if there is someone like here in the room, like maybe I'm using some old phone and everybody in the room knows I'm the only one user of an antique Nokia phone. And a call is coming from this room, then my identity is of course revealed. That's kind of obvious case, but even the other data like the QoS statistics may be revealing. So there are some suggestions, for example, anecdotal on the internet that suggest that calls you can find in call duration if it is boy-to-boy calling or girl-to-girl or husband-to-wife and so on and so forth. And so it depends, but from the legislation point of view, at least the explicit identity is quite a clear case. So we need this information, we collect it, and at the same time we have some requirement to be sensitive about the data. And I'm really, just to get it aligned to the rest of the technology, I'm really speaking only about monitoring. We've got a lot of other security technologies, proactive care, penetration testing, policy auditing, preventing. Voice over IP has its own firewalls called session border controllers because voice over IP has become so complicated that you cannot deal with it using normal firewalls and so on and so forth. But again, I'm now on the monitoring part. And the monitoring part, I shall add, has also one important aspect in the security context, and that's latency. Because time matters. If you look at the, so we are having some honeypots and some piloting tests, so we've got first-hand data, and we know that SIP attacks happen not every day, but not every minute, but every second. And if you plug in a SIP server on the internet on AWS within 3 minutes, or rather within 3 seconds, it's going to receive the first scans. And the most typical attacks, and I will refer to them because they somehow relate to how we do privacy, are dictionary password attacks, just brute force attacks. Typically, for some it may be low, for some it may be high, but the typical speed is like 40 attempts per second. Well, if you have a weak password from Oxford Dictionary, it will take less than an hour and the password is found out. So as an example of how time matters. The other typical attack is what I have disclosed before, fraud using premium phone numbers. Once someone finds a way to make phone calls on your credit card, then he's going to call his own 900 number. And what we very frequently see is SIP-specific scanners, meaning someone is trying to call his 900 numbers, and he tries all kind of prefixes to find a gap in the dialing plan, and eventually make phone calls on your expense. And there's a lot of others, but I'll focus for lack of time on the most frequent ones. So how do we deal with the privacy then when we have this desire to collect as much data as possible? There is it's a conflicting goal, and we have a lot of privacy-sensitive data. So if you make a SIP phone call, it's not unusual to have like 4 or 5 explicit identities who is calling whom, but you may also have dual numbers. You may also have a SIP URI and a telephone number. You can have also address of your more physical address of your device, and so on and so forth. And we do not necessarily want to reveal that. Now, I'm not. I don't want to be mean to the honorable lawyers here in the room, but if we check the solution space, the legal space, the legal methods help maybe as a very proactive method. But honestly, if you've got a SIP service in Europe, someone from, say, China has taken a computer in the US and mounted an attack from there, your legal possibilities are quite limited. Administrative control may be a little bit better to protect privacy, but I don't think it's much worth anyhow. You've got insiders and the access rules can be weak. We cannot take advantage of aggregation, anonymization, and noise in security. Why is that? Because sometimes we want to have the original data as a feedback to the firewall. So we want to say, this user agent is definitely evil. It's causing us troubles. If anything comes with this signature again, just block it before it causes more harm. So if we are trying to add a little bit noise to preserve privacy, we would be in troubles. We would be killing someone else. Minimization, I said, we cannot afford it either. So what we ended up with is we have been trying to use end-to-end encryption of analytical data, and we have been trying to use it very selectively. So when we have a huge JSON document, we are not encrypting every piece of data we have there. Instead, we go after, by way of configuration, we go after what is PII, what is privacy, what is identity data. So if I oversimplify that, we've got some data owner, someone who runs a service. This company, it might be, for example, a third-party provider to government, collects and generates events that describe what's going on, like call detail records. And they are already encrypted when they touch the network. So there's a very small window inside a probe where the text remains clear text. That's why we call it end-to-end encrypted, because when this data gets encrypted to a server-side analytics service, whoever runs that has no idea what's inside. And still, we wish to do analytics, and that's the tricky part. Once we have done some analytics, and I'll get a little bit closer to how we do that, we publish the results to firewalls or to browser, where a browser can decrypt the data if needed, and if someone is possession of the proper credentials. So as for the encryption method, which is the key part of this, we were thinking very hard of a homomorphic encryption. I've been personally very intrigued by that. It's kind of like a big hammer, everything is nailed to you. And it sounds fascinating, and it is fascinating, but at the time it comes at a quite significant CPU expense, causing higher latency, and we are worried about latency. We look at symmetric encryption, and even then we have had, at the volume we process, we have had some issues, especially when you get to the browser. So that's how we ended up with selective encryption. And how we made our job a little bit difficult again. For analytics, encrypt, for a lot of the cases we practically deal with, and I'm not claiming we can solve all of them, alerting cases. But for most of them, we can get them done if we have the capability to do prefix-preserving encryption. And I'll get you some example.
Yeah. So we have time for questions.
Oh, sorry.
Yeah.
Okay, so basically I'm pretty much done here. We've used AES 128 decryption. We have thousands of decryption operations per second, and that is serving the test cases quite well.